Rachel McAdams, and Alessandro Nivola.
Thank you.
It's always in the front row.
Thank you.
Well, welcome. I feel like it's been almost a year since I first saw this movie, and at Sundance, and to come back to it, to see it again, to see just the power of it. It's so raw and intimate and uplifting. That speech at the end, you're free. Especially just these days, it just was such a liberating thing. Okay, that's the critic in me. Now let's talk to this great crowd about this terrific movie. What was it about the story, whether it was the screenplay or the original book, that first resonated with each of you?
Already? You want to start?
Well, I really just I found it really heartbreaking and triumphant at the same time. And I really love the structure of the film, being that there were three really well-formed characters, and no one was there just as a device for another character's arc. So just from an actor's point of view, in terms of the script, it felt really unique that way, and something I hadn't seen in a while, and two really strong female characters, of course, who spend a lot of time together in the film, which, is hard to come by something. So, but yeah, just the story really touched me. It was you just know when you read something that you can't stop thinking about it. It just really stuck inside of me. So.
How about for you?
I guess all those things as well, but I also saw an opportunity to get to know a community in a world that was really alien to me, and that I really knew nothing about, and that seemed very exclusive and insular, and it seemed like it was going to be an exciting challenge to try and find a way to really become intimately familiar with the behavior and the emotional life and thought process of someone from a totally different experience than my own.
Well, let's talk about that immersion into that culture. Honestly, it's alien to me, and I'm Jewish. I'm just not Orthodox. But just the immersion of it, of character, to the point where you're discovering this culture, this other world, so to speak, but you have to make it look exactly familiar and so second nature, so it's convincing as an actor. Like in this case, how did you immerse yourself into that world and get to know the ins and outs so it all seems so secondhand?
And you converted, didn't you?
I still say my morning blessing. Do you remember?
And they really wanted you to be a part of the brotherhood. I mean, do I remember you saying your blessing?
No, do you remember the blessings?
Sure. I mean, I don't remember yours, but I remember mine.
Well, we were sort of having these parallel lives as we were starting the research. The research period that we had for the film was inordinately long in my case. I usually get cast in roles like days before they start because somebody else has dropped out. This time around, I guess I must have been the first pick because I had like 3 months, and so did Rachel, and so we started communicating between LA and New York where we started out, and comparing our different experiences, and we each had sort of managed to find a kind of point of contact as a way into Hasidic communities in our respective cities. In my case, somebody had tipped me off that there was a woman who had a kid in the school that my kid went to in Brooklyn, who had been the daughter of a Hasidic rabbi and had fallen in love with this Asian guy when she was interning at a magazine in New York when she was 19, and she had a baby out of wedlock and just like scrapped the whole thing. And but that her whole background was from this community, and so I got together with her, and she then brought me over to Crown Heights, which is a Lubavitch community there, and introduced me to all of her siblings who were all still living within the community there. And I made really close friends with this one guy in particular. I think we both found, I mean, you can answer to this, but I think we both found that it was easier than we thought to be invited in for a couple of reasons. One is that people are always kind of attracted to the glamour of movies, no matter what walk of life you're in. And so I think as an actor in a film, you get access to certain things that you just wouldn't ever get access to otherwise. But the other reason being that they were terrified that we were going to fuck it up and really kind of not represent their community accurately, which is an understandable concern, meeting some Italian and Irish, so there was like a real sense of like, no, you have to like stick with me. I'm gonna teach you how to do everything, and I think that's where it started, and we both had this experience of being sort of invited into people, the bosom of people's families, and really spending these Shabbos dinners with people who we got to know really well. And then we would call each other at night and say, like, so what did you learn tonight? What Hebrew can you say?
What was your experience like?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, Sebastian found an advisor who was a journalist who actually came in. She was not part of the Jewish Orthodox community, but she basically just, we sat down and she said, anything you want to know, I'll find it out. And I have all these people in all these pockets of London that will have you to dinner, Shabbos dinner. And so that was kind of amazing. Sebastian set that up because, he said, there's so much to learn here. And I almost feel like I didn't have time. I barely scratched the surface, and we did have months and months. I had, 5 months to prepare.
Wow.
And
That's a luxury.
I still feel like I know this much.
Or maybe I wasn't the first guy that they asked.
It was interesting also because the Hasidic communities that we'd been exposed to in New York and LA initially were also very different from the particular community in London that we were going to be portraying, and so then there was like another step of going over to London, and because of course there's a whole speech, and we were it was a combination of the London accents and then the London accent of that particular place in North London and Hendon, and from people who had grown up going to yeshiva school. So there was like a second step, a second wave to the research that happened after we went over there.
Yeah, Sebastian's a fantastic woman, amazing film. What made Sebastian such a great actor's director for each of you, especially compared to so many of the other directors you've worked with over the years?
He seems to love actors.
That's always good.
That helps in the process, and he's a very sensitive, open, hilarious, wonderful person. I think he just brings so much sensitivity to every story he tells, and he's interested in the collaboration, which it was very much that way, but he has incredible vision too. He walks around with a diary, and he storyboards everything, and wants to talk about everything, and or not, if we don't want to, you know. And he's very honest. He said to me one day, I came and asked him, I was always bugging him, and he finally said to me one day, he said, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Let's just get in there and see what happens. And I really appreciated that honesty. And anyway, he's just one of my favorite humans.
Yeah, he's a little man with a big heart.
That's great.
And he, I think that what Rachel began talking about with what drew her to the story was really, in a way, comes from him, that he has so much compassion for all of the characters. And I mean, in particular, I felt that my character in the film, in another director's hands, would have been more of a cliche of an antagonist who was there to just put pressure on Rachel's character and make the audience just long for her to run away from him into Rachel Weisz's arms. And he really loved the character of David as much as he did the two girls' characters, and that created this tension between the three of them that really just made the whole story so much richer. And I really do feel like that kind of came from Sebastian. I mean, he co-wrote the adaptation, and that was definitely on his mind, that he just really, he felt in his heart real affection for all three of the characters.
Working with Rachel Weisz, I mean, she, superb actor, but also she produced the film. She really championed the film. She saw two really strong women, two strong female characters in the movie. Just working with her, not just as an actress, but as a producer who really believed in the material.
Yeah, I mean, I so appreciated the way she was able to take one hat off and put the other one on so seamlessly. She was very involved as a producer, from my eyes, in the beginning before we got the camera. And then she was the actress. She was just playing this part, and she was giving over to Sebastian into the whole process. And then sort of the producer kind of came back in at the end. As we wrapped, and I just thought that was really generous of her, generous of spirit, and she's such a pro. She could have put her stamp on it, and she did, of course. But she really gave the reins over to Sebastian, and she found Sebastian for this. He was her choice, so she was obviously trusting her gut instincts, and so I really just appreciated the way she played both roles.
Yeah, Rachel is a very instinctive kind of actor. Whenever we would get into any kind of conversations about the scene before we started shooting it, she'd say, no, listen, don't talk about it. Let's just do it. And which is really the best way to go about that. And I think we both kind of took her lead in that way. I totally agree with her that often the most surprising things happen, and the most kind of alive and spontaneous work happens when you haven't kind of talked it to death. And so that was kind of a standard that she set for all of us that I think was really lent to the kind of possibility for things to happen that weren't planned.
So, when I first saw the film, it just really hit me, just the honesty of it. Like the scene where she's like, Ronit says to Esty, "Do you like women?" She's like, "Yeah." She doesn't hesitate. She's, "Yeah." And yet she doesn't have to think about it. She knows she does, yet she's been trapped for all this time. And then you get to the intimate scene, and it's so raw, and it's beautiful and raw and honest, and you know, it's so honest. Yeah, you can clap. It's okay.
So we had a Q&A after the screening back in April, and I remember it was like a small sort of tastemaker screening, and there were a lot of fancy people there. And at one point, a woman raised her hand, and who I recognized to be Patti Smith, and she said, that scene where the one girl spits into the other girl's mouth. It was so beautiful.
I missed that.
She was busy having a baby.
Yeah.
Weirdly, they both had babies not long after that scene, so I'm not sure.
So, I mean, just to setting up to shoot that scene, how do you feel safe to bring the honesty and the intimacy to that scene?
Well, they're always a little uncomfortable.
Sure.
That's just part of it. But Sebastian really led the charge on that. I mean, he had been talking, it was actually the thing we talked about the most. And Rachel was up for talking about that scene for some reason.
She didn't want that to be too spontaneous.
So right from the get-go, Sebastian was like, what do we think about this? And he wanted to mark it out like it was a dance, and he wanted to have some very intentional things in it that were specific to these two characters. I mean, how do you show a love scene in a new way on the screen and not make it gratuitous? And this was such a plot point. It drives the characters forward.
Sure.
So we had that going for us. But I have to say we were nervous. We were definitely nervous to start. And I think we were both in hair and makeup way too long that day. Get and then finally dove in, and it was great. And I remember we looked at each other at the end of the day and said, that was so lovely. There was something so lovely about it. And we also shot it towards the end of filming, so we had spent a lot of time together. And Sebastian had, again, storyboarded the sex scene, which I had never seen before. So I was like, can you see this?
Because it's interesting you shot it towards the end. How long was the shoot? How fast did you shoot? And this sort of, you've both done big films and indies. How much do you love the immediacy and the urgency and just the naturalness of shooting quickly on independent film?
I hate that.
Do you? Okay.
I just like to do a lot of takes. But that said, this wasn't a rushed shoot. Despite there not being a lot of money, it didn't feel like, I've definitely made a lot of movies where I've had, 2 takes and you're out. And,
Right.
And yes, don't get me wrong, there is some, an energy that comes from that.
Right.
And there's something about, you just can't sit and try and second guess yourself after every time they move on to a new camera angle, because you'll just drive yourself insane because you're never satisfied, and so you may as well just relinquish control completely. And there's something invigorating about that, definitely. But I also, love the idea that as long as you're free and you're really in your character and in the world of the film, that there are all kinds of different possibilities for how a scene could play out. And if both of the actors are really playing off each other and things are happening that are alive and real, that 1 or 2 is not enough. But in this case, it felt civilized. It didn't feel like we were on a runaway train or anything. And scenes, a lot of the scenes, had, a really kind of intense and quiet atmosphere to them. And so there was just no way we could have shot this thing if people were just banging around and moving lights while we were still trying to get the shot. And I think it was definitely a feeling of, you know, calm and attention to detail.
You know, for you, I mean, I saw this around the same time I saw Game Night, which by the way is hilarious. Game Night is hilarious. Jesse Plemons is awesome.
So good.
But okay, so like two films that are so fundamentally different, just because they are different, but also the way one's a studio film, one's not. Which sort of do you feel you prefer?
I'm gonna give that really boring answer. I like both. I do like them both because I find comedy so hard.
Yeah, it is.
Because if you're not funny, you fail. You know, like with a drama, you can kind of find the nuance, and you can say, "Oh, I meant to play that character that way." And you know, but if you're just not funny in a comedy, then that's a problem. So I do find it really challenging to do comedy, and that excites me as an actor. But you know, it was really nice. I shot these back to back. Game Night and this, I had about a month off in between, so I felt a little schizophrenic, but also it was kind of a nice change of pace to come out of playing this character and go into a fun romp.
Oh wow! Yeah, I'll bet. Cathartic.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So you filmed, you know, after all the immersion you did in LA, New York, and then you filmed the movie in North London. Was it by St. John's Wood by any chance?
Well, the synagogue that we shot in was in St. John's Wood.
Just FYI, that's where Abbey Road is. So
yeah, not far from where the Beatles were. Yeah, the synagogue was not really. I mean, that was a kind of artistic license because that synagogue was a Sephardic synagogue, and you know, we were an Ashkenazi Orthodox sect, and so that synagogue would never be the synagogue that we actually would be, you know, that I would be delivering that speech in. But it was just so damn beautiful that it was irresistible. So that was in St. John's Wood, but everything else was in the actual community where the book, you know, the book was written by a woman who had been part of that community and had left and gone to Oxford and then written the book years later. And we shot in the little sort of area of North London called Hendon, where she had grown up.
And where Rachel Weisz also grew up.
And right near where
Oh,
Rachel. Because Rachel, unlike the we imposters here, she was, you know, had grown up with one of her parents being Orthodox Jewish and had grown up saying a lot of the blessings and going through a lot of the rituals that we were learning how to do. So we, you know, had the added pressure of having her watching over us as we were trying to be convincing.
I want to ask, you know, just because I ask about the like anatomy of a scene. You know, that final scene is just so, like I said, it's uplifting. It's like a rousing a moment of freedom, literally and figuratively. Like take us through just like the filming of that scene, because it's just such a great moment and a great way to sort of close out the film.
Do you mean the scene in the street?
Yeah.
Or
the synagogue.
the synagogue
Yeah,
scene?
that.
Yeah, I mean, that was your day.
That was your day.
It was amazing. It was amazing to watch. I mean, we were gobsmacked up way up there.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the weird thing. They were so far away. We could, you know, only just barely see each other because it was a really big building. And the scene is like actually a whole bunch of scenes because it begins really just after the revelation on the stairs that you're pregnant, and it goes through a whole sort of series of like ratcheting up of this pressure that builds and builds and builds, and the thing that I just remember most was the choir that they had, and that was a real men's group of singers. And that the song that they sing in there is just so, I mean, it just made the hair on the back of my neck stand up hearing it. like it just made me want to cry every time I heard it, and they would play it over. I mean, they would actually sing it at the beginning of every day. Thank God. And so there's this like incredible sort of rousing, you know, earth-shattering music that kind of connects you to, you know, something deeply spiritual, and then just is completely silent, and you know, so there was a rhythm, like a built-in rhythm to the whole scene that, you know, my feeling is that movies are all about rhythm and scenes, you know, within the movie as a whole and within a scene. And it's all about finding, you know, where the moments are that it really like drives hard, and then where is it like, you know, easy and languorous, and where is it, you know, does it have like a steady little pitter-patter rhythm, and where did, you know, all those different rhythms are what, you know, more than any kind of intellectual idea about what's going on in a scene or what's happening between the two characters. It's just that feeling of like pacing and ebb and flow of rhythm that to me is like how I kind of understand a scene. And this just had that like naturally built in, so that you could just kind of ride it, and you felt it all the way through, you know, beginning with, you know, the girls kind of making their way through, you know, into the thing, and everybody kind of watching them, all this anticipation sort of building, and David there, like, you know, just completely internalizing this like crisis, just, you know, his heart just going a million miles an hour, like a kind of panic attack, I think, really was what was happening. And then that with the music, like building and building and building, and then everything just goes boom, and just stops, completely quiet, and then that's where the kind of speech begins, and he has to kind of, you know, look up and sort of face these two women who he loves, and try to like tell them the truth.
And that the scene that comes right afterwards is equally powerful in a more intimate way. You know, just the filming that final scene of the film. What was that like for you and Rachel?
It was an intense day. Yeah, it really was. Yeah, we had a lot of debate about whether I should wear my wig or not, or whether I should cover my head when I ran out into the street or not. So we talked about that a lot. What did that say about, probably no one noticed, but what did that say about what's going to happen to her after this? I mean, she's still a part of this community. And so, you know, we chatted a lot about the look of that scene, and it was a lot of running and crying. Is what I remember running after that taxi, but and it's sort of same thing. Like every time I just stepped into that car, it was like everything sort of melted away, and I just sort of gazed into Rachel's gorgeous eyes, and that's all it took, you know. So and that also we shot that quite late in the process. So it always helps when you've got the whole film underneath you.
Sure.
Stirred up.
I mean, the thing about those kinds of scenes, both of those two scenes that you're talking about, is that really the challenge is, you know, finding this kind of solitude in the chaos of everything that's going on. And there's always these logistical things, and in the case of the synagogue, obviously, there are just like 1,000 extras, and, you know, so many different technical demands on that scene, and so much noise and chaos, and like, you know, just trying to find a place where you can go and kind of hide and just, you know, pretend that the world is just doesn't exist, and you just are able to kind of stay within your imagination. In the case of this scene, you know, there's kind of the timings of the cab like pulling away at the right time, and having to come and get in at just the right moment, and then you know, the camera has to land on its spot, and that's the moment where like you have to like let it rip, and it's all this challenge of just like letting the rest of the world fade away. And Sebastian was really good at protecting that for us, like always finding, I mean, I remember I had like a little there was like a little kind of corner down at the bottom, the basement of the synagogue, where I could go down in between takes and just sort of like sit there in the dark. And the only time that people would come by me was if they had to go to the bathroom. So people like running to the John while I was trying to get my next take together. But you know, that's what it is. You know, it's finding the sort of solitude and feeling alone to be able to in the midst of that cave.
Just want to open up to the audience. We have a wow. Okay, because you were the one who clapped. Ask the first question.
Yeah, it's kind of a question engrossed in a lot of other. You rock, by the way. You do these things, and I see you, and you really, you know, you great. You really do.
Yeah.
There you go.
Makes it fun.
Thank you so much. Do you have any questions for them?
It's a couple of things. One is that I have to commend you, just unbelievable performances. Italian, Irish, Catholic actor guy, in love with a Jewish chick, and never be able to spell Hanukkah when you're texting. You know, being around that whole thing when they have, you know, the get-togethers, and it's nerve-wracking. And for you guys to be able to take a role like that, to want to take a role as powerful as that, and do such an outstanding job, and man. Brother, you just got it at that end there, and actually it shows that the best part of religion, when it works, like forgiving at the hardest time. So sometimes it's just it's important to have a moment like that for an institution of faith, and you did such a great job, and I'm sorry to just destroy that part, but I just got to tell you, thank you, Rachel, for giving all dudes in this world the greatest, most erotic scene, and it overtakes there's a couple other ones that I can't remember the name because they don't matter anymore. Thank you for that, and if you want to elaborate, because you said Alejandro had his day, if you want to talk about your day more, we are here to listen. God bless you both for being here.
All right.
I'm gonna die now.
The forgiveness angle, you know, actually it's great that you brought that up, because the forgiveness angle of this movie is universal. I mean, these are universal themes in this movie that are completely relatable, you know, regardless of race, color, or creed, you name it. You know, what kind of reactions have you gotten from people overall for the movie and for the liberation of it? People can relate to it. I mean, were there reactions that you got from people who were touched by it?
You got me, people.
I mean, my girlfriend said to me, she said, I think my mom is gay. She went and saw Disobedience 3 times, and she can't stop talking about it in a certain way. So, positive reactions, mostly, I found. But
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we were sort of really on tenterhooks to know was how the Orthodox communities would respond to the movie, and almost, I don't think I've met a single person from that community who had a negative reaction to the film, at least as far as, you know, the politics of the movie go. And that was a relief. I mean, I think that they felt like, you know, all 3 characters were rendered in a way that, you know, didn't, you know, pit the religion against love, and that they were grateful for that, and you know, they recognized that we'd really worked hard to try and, you know, bring the detail of the sort of ritualistic elements of that community.
Got time for one more, and you.
Thank you. I thought your performances were both so moving, and there were so many themes and messages wrapped up in the movie. I was wondering if there was one in particular that brought you to the movie, that inspired you to want to make it, or if there were more than one. Just curious about that.
Yeah, was there a scene when you read the story of the screenplay that brought you to the film, that made you go, I gotta do this?
Wait, a scene or a theme?
I said theme, sorry.
Oh.
A theme.
Oh, a theme.
Or a message.
Even better, yes.
Takeaway from the movie.
I mean, look. The front and center message is, you've just got to love who you got to love, and that message can be told in a lot of different ways. But it was being told in a context that was so specific, and through a lens of into a world that nobody has really seen that story told before. That I think it was really hard not to feel like that was something that would be exciting and important to bring to life. I mean, that's an obvious answer, I guess, because it's just so clearly what the movie's about. But it is what the movie's about, right? I mean, what are some of the other themes?
Well, that was, I think, the main theme.
Yeah.
I mean, you could know better than me, probably.
Yeah.
I just thought it was so interesting how your character, Rachel, started out so repressed and sort of like not in her own life, and then slowly got more and more alive and awake and open.
Oh, it's a great arc.
And I thought that was really an interesting theme, how truth can bring someone into their own life. I thought it was interesting how your character was just unconditionally loving of both women throughout. And I thought that...
Yeah, although it's interesting, that this was something that was on my mind throughout the filming of the movie, is that he's a character whose natural bent is to be accepting, and as a rabbi who was going to be taking over this community, he probably was more of a kind of progressive-minded person than the guy before him. But when it becomes personal, and the person you love is being ripped away from you, and your family is being torn apart, suddenly your values become much more conservative. And so for a period of time in the film, he becomes really intractable, and that's so human, before he finally, finds the strength to, come back to the man he really is, or whatever. But that's interesting that you mentioned.
Ladies and gentlemen, just